The biggest mistake you can make is judging someone before you know who they are. The words had barely left the elderly man's mouth when Officer Daniel Brooks stepped out of his patrol cruiser and slammed the driver's door shut with enough confidence to make everyone on the sidewalk look his way. Morning traffic flowed steadily through downtown as commuters carried coffee cups, briefcases, and shopping bags beneath the cool spring sunshine. But within seconds their attention shifted toward a charcoal gray sport utility vehicle that had just pulled neatly against the curb. Daniel adjusted the radio on his shoulder before walking toward the driver with the relaxed swagger of someone who believed every decision he made would be supported without question. Behind the wheel, Naomi Carter calmly turned off the engine, collected a slim leather portfolio from the passenger seat, and stepped onto the sidewalk. She wore a simple navy blazer, dark slacks, and polished shoes that matched the professional image of someone heading to an important meeting rather than becoming the center of unexpected attention. Daniel barely looked at her face before speaking. "Do not move another step." His voice carried across the sidewalk, causing nearby pedestrians to slow down. Naomi stopped exactly where she was and met his eyes without the slightest sign of panic. "Good morning, officer," she said evenly. "Is there a problem?" Daniel folded his arms and glanced toward her vehicle before looking back at her. "That depends on how honest you plan to be." Naomi remained silent, giving him every opportunity to explain. Instead, Daniel continued building his own conclusion. "We received information about a vehicle matching this description. I think you have some questions to answer." Naomi nodded once. "Then I will answer every reasonable question you ask." The calm response only seemed to irritate him. He expected excuses, nervousness, or argument. Instead, he found someone who stood quietly, making no sudden movements and offering complete cooperation. Around them, more people began watching. A woman leaving a bakery paused near the entrance. A delivery driver leaned against his truck. Someone standing outside a coffee shop quietly raised a phone and started recording. Daniel noticed the growing audience and unconsciously straightened his posture. "License and registration," he demanded. Naomi slowly reached into her jacket pocket, removed her driver's license, and handed it to him. "The vehicle registration is inside the glove compartment," she said. "You are welcome to retrieve it." Daniel looked at the license for barely a second before slipping it into his pocket instead of returning it. "Convenient answer," he replied with a faint smile. "Trying to make this more difficult than it needs to be?" Naomi shook her head gently. "Actually, I am trying to make it easier." Daniel ignored the remark. He circled the vehicle once, peering through the windows as though expecting to discover something that justified the conclusion he had already reached. Every glance from the crowd seemed to strengthen his confidence. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "people usually become nervous when they know they have done something wrong." Naomi looked toward the reflection of flashing patrol lights in the storefront glass before returning her attention to him. "Sometimes," she answered quietly, "people stay calm because they know the truth has a way of arriving on its own." Daniel let out a short laugh, completely convinced she was bluffing. What he did not know was that less than 10 minutes away, an entire command staff was waiting for one woman who had not yet arrived for the most important morning of her career, and every passing second brought them closer to discovering exactly where she had been delayed. Daniel Brooks slipped Naomi Carter's driver's license into his pocket as though keeping it was the most natural thing in the world. He never noticed the brief glance exchanged between two people standing outside the nearby coffee shop. To them, the encounter already felt less like a routine stop and more like someone trying very hard to prove a point. Naomi remained exactly where she stood, one hand resting lightly on the leather portfolio she carried, her posture calm enough to frustrate anyone hoping for a dramatic reaction. Nearly 2 hours earlier, before the streets had filled with commuters, Naomi had crossed the county line with the quiet confidence of someone beginning an entirely new chapter. She had accepted the transfer after years of leading specialized investigations, earning promotions through patience, consistency, and the ability to solve problems without seeking attention. Few officers outside senior leadership recognized her face because she rarely appeared in the spotlight. Her work had always spoken louder than introductions ever could. The plan for that morning had been remarkably simple. Arrive at headquarters before 8:30, meet the command staff, complete the official welcome ceremony, and begin serving as the new captain of Central Division. She had intentionally dressed in professional business attire instead of a formal command uniform because she wanted her first day to begin with conversations rather than ceremony. None of that seemed possible anymore as she quietly watched Officer Brooks continue convincing himself he had everything under control. Daniel tapped a few notes into the computer inside his patrol vehicle before stepping back toward Naomi with renewed confidence. "Interesting," he said, looking briefly at her sport utility vehicle. "You do not seem very concerned." Naomi answered without hesitation. Being respectful and being concerned are not the same thing. Daniel smiled faintly. "Most people start explaining themselves by now." "You have not asked a question that requires an explanation," Naomi replied. Around them, the crowd continued to grow. A father walking his young daughter slowed long enough to observe the conversation before crossing to the opposite sidewalk. A florist arranging flowers outside her shop quietly watched from the doorway. Every passing minute attracted another pair of curious eyes. Daniel seemed energized by the attention. He believed every witness reinforced his authority. Naomi understood something entirely different. Witnesses preserve perspective. Across town, inside police headquarters, Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson glanced once again at the empty chair reserved for the department's incoming captain. Several division commanders had already gathered in the conference room, exchanging polite conversation while checking the time more often than usual. Rebecca finally turned toward the communications supervisor. "Has Captain Carter called?" The answer came with a slow shake of the head. "No, ma'am. We have tried her department phone twice." Rebecca frowned thoughtfully. Naomi Carter had built a reputation for arriving early to every assignment. Being late without explanation simply was not like her. "Try again," Rebecca said quietly, and asked dispatch whether anyone has had contact with her vehicle. Back on the sidewalk, Daniel folded his arms once more as another transmission crackled through the radio, clipped to his shoulder. The dispatcher sounded calm, but there was unmistakable urgency beneath every word. "Attention, all field supervisors. Communications is attempting to locate Captain Naomi Carter. Report immediately if you have made contact." Kyle Mercer looked instinctively toward Naomi before slowly turning to Daniel. Daniel dismissed the transmission with a careless wave of his hand, completely unaware that the name echoing through his radio belonged to the woman standing only a few feet in front of him. The dispatcher's message faded into a burst of static that hung in the morning air for only a second before silence returned. Officer Kyle Mercer looked from the radio to Naomi Carter, then back to Daniel Brooks. Something about the timing refused to make sense. Daniel, however, acted as though he had heard nothing important. "They are probably trying to track down somebody across town," he said with an easy grin. "It has nothing to do with this stop." Naomi remained still, her expression unchanged. She neither corrected him nor volunteered any information beyond what had already been asked. Daniel interpreted her composure as confidence without substance. "You know," he said as he walked another slow circle around the sport utility vehicle, "people usually tell on themselves if you give them enough time." Naomi answered calmly. "Sometimes people only reveal the assumptions they have already made." Daniel let out a short laugh. "That sounds rehearsed." "No," Naomi replied. "It sounds experienced." The small crowd exchanged quiet glances. A woman standing near the bakery whispered something to her husband before continuing to record with her phone. A delivery driver leaned against the side of his truck, watching every word without interrupting. Daniel noticed the growing audience and seemed even more determined to prove he was right. He stopped beside the driver's door and peered through the window again. On the passenger seat rested a leather folder stamped with the city seal, partially covered by Naomi's portfolio. Daniel frowned for a brief moment before dismissing it. "Trying to look official does not impress me," he said. Naomi simply replied, "Everything inside that vehicle belongs exactly where it is." Daniel reached toward his shoulder microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I am requesting additional verification on a vehicle matching information from an ongoing call. Driver remains on scene." Naomi quietly looked toward him. "Officer Brooks, I have answered every question you asked." "Not every question that matters," Daniel replied. Kyle shifted uneasily beside the patrol car. "Daniel, maybe we should verify the registration before we assume anything else." Daniel barely looked at him. "I already know enough." Kyle lowered his voice. "We do not lose anything by checking. We lose time." Daniel answered sharply. And I am not letting someone walk away while paperwork catches up. Naomi watched the exchange without interruption. Years of supervising officers had taught her that the strongest departments were built by people willing to question themselves before questioning everyone else. Across town, Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson stood inside the communications center as another dispatcher pointed toward a digital city map. A blinking location appeared near the downtown business district after an automatic vehicle query connected with Naomi's department issued credentials. Rebecca's expression changed immediately. That cannot be right, she murmured. The communications supervisor looked up from the screen. Captain Carter's assigned vehicle appears to be stationary. Rebecca reached for her jacket without another word. Prepare the command vehicles. We are going there now. Back on the sidewalk, Daniel slipped a small notepad into his pocket and looked directly at Naomi with complete confidence. Until I finish sorting this out, you are staying exactly where you are. Naomi gave the slightest nod. If that is your decision, then I will wait. Daniel smiled as though he had just ended the conversation on his terms. He never noticed that, several blocks away, 3 black command sport utility vehicles had already turned onto the boulevard, carrying the very people who had been searching for the woman standing quietly in front of him all along. Daniel Brooks adjusted the body camera fastened to the center of his uniform and looked around with quiet satisfaction as more pedestrians slowed to watch. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the storefront windows, turning an ordinary weekday morning into a public spectacle. Every new face seemed to reinforce his belief that he was in complete control. Naomi Carter noticed the growing crowd, but never allowed it to change her expression. She stood beside her sport utility vehicle with the same calm posture she had maintained from the beginning, her leather portfolio resting comfortably at her side. She had learned years ago that dignity was never measured by the volume of another person's voice. Daniel pointed toward the vehicle. Step a little farther away from the driver's door. Naomi complied immediately without hesitation. Thank you, she replied politely. The response caught him off guard for only a moment. You are being unusually cooperative. Naomi met his eyes. Professional conversations become much easier when both people choose professionalism. Daniel smiled with quiet disbelief. You really think you are teaching me something today? Naomi answered evenly. No. I simply believe every interaction gives people an opportunity to make good decisions. Daniel dismissed the remark with a wave of his hand before walking around the vehicle once more. Through the windshield, he noticed a department parking permit resting neatly on the dashboard. His eyes narrowed briefly. Kyle Mercer stepped closer and looked through the glass as well. Daniel, he said quietly, that looks like an official department permit. Daniel barely glanced at it. Those are easy enough to copy. Kyle did not sound convinced. It also has this year's security decal. Daniel shrugged. That does not prove anything. Naomi remained silent. She watched the conversation unfold exactly as it was, allowing the facts to exist without interruption. Across the street, the woman recording lowered her phone just long enough to whisper to another bystander. She has not argued with him once. The man beside her nodded. She has not needed to. Daniel turned back toward Naomi. Until I verify everything, this vehicle is staying exactly where it is. That is your decision, Naomi answered calmly. I only ask that you verify every available fact before reaching your final conclusion. Daniel folded his arms. I already know enough. Kyle quietly looked away. He no longer shared that confidence. The patrol radio suddenly crackled again, louder than before. Attention, all supervisors and field units. Communications is still attempting immediate contact with Captain Naomi Carter. Any officer with information is directed to respond at once. Kyle instinctively reached toward the radio. Daniel pressed the transmit button first. Unit 12 is occupied with an active investigation. The dispatcher paused for a brief second before replying. Unit 12, remain at your present location. Command staff is responding to you now. Daniel smiled as he clipped the radio back onto his shoulder. Perfect, he said confidently. Now everyone will see I handled this exactly the way I should have. Naomi looked briefly toward the far end of the boulevard, where 3 black command sport utility vehicles had just turned onto the street, their polished exteriors catching the morning sunlight as they moved steadily toward the gathering crowd. She said nothing. She simply watched them approach, knowing that within moments assumptions would give way to facts. and the morning that Daniel believed had confirmed his judgment was about to redefine his entire career. The three black Command Sport Utility vehicles moved steadily through downtown traffic before coming to a smooth stop across the street from the growing crowd. Their arrival was quiet, but the effect was immediate. Conversations faded. Several people lowered their phones for a moment before lifting them again, sensing that something important was about to happen. Daniel Brooks noticed the vehicles and smiled to himself. He assumed command staff had arrived to support his decision. "Looks like this will be over soon," he said confidently as he adjusted his uniform. Naomi Carter briefly looked toward the lead vehicle before returning her attention to Daniel. Her expression remained calm, neither relieved nor anxious, simply patient. Kyle Mercer followed the approaching vehicles with growing concern. He recognized the government license plates and the command insignia displayed near the windshields. "Daniel," he said quietly, "those are command vehicles." Daniel nodded without concern. "Exactly. They can help finish this." Before Kyle could respond, the patrol radio crackled once again. The dispatcher spoke with unusual urgency. "Unit 12, acknowledge immediately." Daniel pressed the microphone. "Unit 12 responding. Remain exactly where you are. Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson is arriving at your location. Do not clear the scene." Daniel smiled. "Understood." He clipped the microphone back onto his shoulder and looked at Naomi. "Perfect timing." Naomi answered softly. "Sometimes timing reveals what preparation cannot." Daniel chuckled. "You really enjoy speaking in riddles." "No," Naomi replied. "I simply know that facts eventually speak for themselves." The crowd continued watching every movement. The woman outside the bakery whispered to another customer. "She has stayed calm the entire time." The customer nodded. That usually means someone is confident in the truth. Daniel ignored the comments completely. He believed the growing audience would soon witness confirmation that he had handled the situation correctly. Across the street, the lead command vehicle door opened. Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson stepped onto the sidewalk wearing her command uniform, followed by two senior command officers carrying department tablets and document cases. Rebecca did not rush. She walked with measured confidence, scanning the scene before her eyes settled on Naomi. For the briefest moment, concern crossed her face before it disappeared behind professional composure. Kyle noticed that expression immediately. His stomach tightened. Rebecca was not looking at Naomi with suspicion. She was looking at her with recognition. Daniel still failed to notice. He stepped forward with an easy smile, eager to explain the situation before anyone else could speak. "Assistant Chief," he called confidently, "we stopped a suspicious vehicle matching information from an ongoing investigation. The driver has been cooperative, but I wanted to verify everything before releasing her." Rebecca slowed her pace without answering him. Instead, she continued walking directly toward Naomi. Daniel glanced back at the crowd with quiet satisfaction, convinced he had demonstrated excellent judgment in front of both the public and department leadership. Kyle remained completely still. Every instinct told him the next few seconds would determine far more than the outcome of one traffic stop. Naomi simply waited, her portfolio resting comfortably at her side as the assistant chief stopped only a few feet away. For one silent heartbeat, nobody spoke. The entire sidewalk seemed frozen, every witness watching, every phone recording, and every assumption hanging in the air, waiting for a single sentence that would change everything. Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson stopped directly in front of Naomi Carter and, without the slightest hesitation, extended her hand with a warm professional smile. "Captain Carter," she said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "welcome to Central Division. We have been looking forward to your arrival." For a brief moment, the entire sidewalk fell silent. Even the sounds of passing traffic seemed distant as every person watching tried to process what they had just heard. Naomi accepted the handshake with quiet confidence. "Thank you, Assistant Chief," she replied. "I apologize for the unexpected delay." Rebecca glanced briefly toward Daniel Brooks before returning her attention to Naomi. "We became concerned when you did not arrive on schedule." Naomi answered calmly. "Unfortunately, I was occupied." Daniel felt the color leave his face. His confident posture disappeared almost instantly as the meaning of the conversation settled over him. He looked from Naomi to Rebecca and then toward Kyle Mercer, who lowered his eyes without saying a word. Daniel finally managed to speak. "Captain, Rebecca turned toward him with a composed expression. Officer Brooks, allow me to introduce Captain Naomi Carter, your new commanding officer for Central Division. She officially assumes command this morning. Several people in the crowd exchanged stunned looks. The woman recording quietly whispered, I knew something was different. Another bystander slowly shook his head. She never once raised her voice. Daniel stared at Naomi in complete disbelief. Every assumption he had confidently made over the past several minutes collapsed under a single sentence. He instinctively reached into his pocket and removed Naomi's driver's license, holding it with both hands before offering it back to her. Captain, the words refused to come. Naomi accepted the license politely without showing anger or satisfaction. Thank you, Officer Brooks. Her voice remained exactly as calm as it had been since the beginning of the encounter. That quiet professionalism only deepened Daniel's discomfort. Rebecca looked around the scene, taking in the patrol vehicle, the growing crowd, and the dozens of phones still pointed toward them. Captain, she asked gently, has everything been resolved? Naomi paused for a brief moment before answering. Not yet. I believe there are still several facts that deserve careful review. Rebecca nodded once. She understood immediately that Naomi was choosing her words with purpose. This was not about embarrassment. It was about accountability. Kyle finally stepped forward. Assistant Chief, he said respectfully, I believe my body camera and Officer Brooks's body camera documented the entire interaction from beginning to end. Rebecca looked directly at him. Thank you, Officer Mercer. Please make certain those recordings are preserved according to department policy. Daniel slowly lowered his head. Until that moment, he had almost forgotten his own camera had been recording continuously. Every assumption, every unnecessary comment, every decision made before confirming the facts had been captured exactly as it happened. Naomi adjusted the leather portfolio beneath her arm and quietly looked across the sidewalk at the people who had witnessed everything. Public trust, she said softly, is built one interaction at a time. Rebecca gave a small approving nod before gesturing toward headquarters. Captain Carter, whenever you are ready, your command staff is waiting to welcome you. Naomi looked once more at Daniel, whose confidence had been replaced by complete uncertainty, then calmly answered, I will be there shortly. There is still one conversation that needs to happen before my first day officially begins. Naomi Carter waited until the last bystander had stopped whispering before she turned her full attention to Daniel Brooks. She did not raise her voice, and she did not allow disappointment to become anger. The silence itself carried more weight than any lecture ever could. Daniel stood rigidly beside his patrol vehicle, avoiding eye contact for the first time that morning. The certainty that had guided every decision only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson remained nearby without interrupting. She understood that this conversation belonged to the new captain. Naomi spoke calmly. Officer Brooks, when you approached my vehicle this morning, what information did you have that confirmed I had committed a violation? Daniel hesitated. I believe the vehicle matched information that had been reported. Naomi nodded slightly. Believed. Did you verify that information before reaching your conclusion? Daniel lowered his eyes. No, Captain. Naomi continued with the same steady tone. When I answered your questions respectfully, did my cooperation cause you to reconsider your assumptions? He took a slow breath before answering. No, Captain. Several officers from the command staff exchanged quiet glances. Nobody spoke. They understood this was becoming a lesson far more valuable than a private reprimand behind closed doors. Naomi looked briefly toward Kyle Mercer. Officer Mercer suggested verifying additional facts before moving forward. Why was that recommendation not accepted? Daniel answered honestly. I thought I already understood the situation. Naomi gave a small nod. Confidence is valuable. Unverified confidence is dangerous. The words settled over the crowd with remarkable clarity. Even the people recording with their phones remained completely silent. Naomi continued. Every person an officer meets deserves to be treated as an individual, not as an assumption waiting to be confirmed. Our badge gives us responsibility. It does not give us permission to decide who someone is before the facts exist. Daniel finally looked up. His expression no longer reflected embarrassment alone. It showed genuine recognition that he had failed to meet the standard expected of him. Captain, he said quietly, I made several decisions before I had enough information. I understand that now. Naomi studied him for a moment before responding. Recognizing a mistake is the first step. Learning from it is the step that protects the next person you meet. Assistant Chief Lawson stepped forward. Captain Carter, internal professional standards will receive every recording from this incident. Department policy requires a complete review. Naomi acknowledged her with a nod. That is appropriate. The process exists for a reason. She then turned back toward Daniel. This review is not about one difficult morning. It is about whether our community can trust that every officer will pause long enough to let facts come before conclusions. Daniel answered immediately. I understand. Kyle quietly added. Captain, I hope every officer in the division hears that message. Naomi offered him a grateful smile. They will. She looked across the sidewalk where dozens of witnesses still stood watching. People remember how they are treated long after they forget the reason an officer approached them. Every interaction either strengthens trust or weakens it. That choice belongs to us. As she finished speaking, the crowd slowly began dispersing, but not before many exchanged one final look at the woman who had responded to every unfair assumption with patience instead of hostility, leaving behind a lesson that every person present would remember long after the flashing patrol lights disappeared. By the time Naomi Carter arrived at Central Division headquarters, the story of the unexpected traffic stop had already begun circulating through the building. Nobody spoke loudly about it, but quiet conversations stopped whenever she passed through a hallway. She greeted every employee with the same calm professionalism she had shown on the sidewalk, shaking hands with civilian staff, dispatch supervisors, detectives, and patrol officers alike. Not once did she mention what had happened that morning. Inside the command conference room, Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson officially introduced her to the leadership team. Every division commander stood as Naomi entered. Rebecca smiled proudly before addressing the room. Captain Carter has earned every assignment she has held through integrity, fairness, and consistent leadership. Those same values will guide this division moving forward. Naomi thanked her before stepping to the front of the room. She looked around at the faces before her and noticed officers of different ages, backgrounds, and experiences waiting to hear their new commander's first words. Every community deserves officers who begin with facts, she said. Respect is not something we give only after someone earns it. Respect is where every professional interaction begins. Several supervisors nodded quietly. Others took notes. The message was simple, but it carried unusual weight because many of them had already heard fragments of what had taken place only an hour earlier. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks sat alone inside an administrative office a few floors below, completing the first of several required reports. His body camera had already been submitted as evidence for a professional standards review. Every time he replayed the encounter in his mind, he realized another moment when he could have chosen a different path. Nobody had forced him to ignore Officer Kyle Mercer's suggestions. Nobody had required him to reach conclusions before confirming the facts. Every decision had been his own. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Kyle stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on the desk without saying anything at first. Finally, he spoke. You know, this did not become a problem because you stopped a vehicle. It became a problem because you stopped listening. Daniel looked down at the report in front of him. I kept thinking I was proving I was right. Kyle nodded. Sometimes proving we are right becomes more important than discovering whether we actually are. Daniel sighed quietly. Captain Carter could have embarrassed me in front of everyone. She could have, Kyle agreed. Instead, she taught a lesson that every officer in this building needed to hear. Later that afternoon, Naomi requested that every patrol officer attend a department-wide briefing before the end of the week. Rumors immediately spread that she intended to announce disciplinary changes or new enforcement policies. Instead, she prepared a presentation focused on professionalism, procedural fairness, and community trust. She instructed the training unit to include anonymous body camera footage from several positive encounters across the department instead of highlighting individual mistakes. Her goal was not to create fear inside the organization. Her goal was to create better habits. As the meeting request appeared on every officer's schedule, Daniel read the notification twice before quietly closing his computer. He understood that the coming review would determine the consequences of his decisions, but he also sensed something else. His new captain was giving the entire department an opportunity to change before another unfair assumption became someone else's unforgettable experience. 1 week later, every seat inside the Central Division briefing room was filled. Patrol officers, supervisors, detectives, dispatch representatives, and civilian employees sat quietly as Captain Naomi Carter stepped to the front of the room. The conversations that had filled the room only moments earlier disappeared immediately. Everyone understood that her first department-wide address would define the culture she expected from that day forward. Naomi looked across the room before speaking. "Every badge in this department represents authority," she began. "But authority without fairness eventually loses the trust it depends on." The room remained silent. Last week reminded all of us that assumptions can travel faster than facts. Our responsibility is to make certain facts always arrive first. She did not mention names. She did not point toward anyone. She did not replay the incident or attempt to embarrass an individual officer. Instead, she displayed several examples of positive body camera interactions collected from across the department. Officers were shown listening carefully before making decisions, explaining procedures respectfully, and treating every person with dignity regardless of appearance, neighborhood, or circumstance. Professionalism is not measured by how we treat people during easy encounters, Naomi continued. It is measured during difficult ones. Every person deserves the same respect before, during, and after an investigation. The community is always watching, even when no camera is visible. Around the room, officers nodded thoughtfully. Some wrote notes. Others quietly reflected on situations from their own careers. Daniel Brooks sat near the back beside Kyle Mercer. He listened without looking away once. Every sentence reminded him of the choices he had made that morning and the opportunities he had ignored. When the meeting ended, Assistant Chief Rebecca Lawson announced the results of the Professional Standards Review. The investigation concluded that Daniel had failed to follow several department expectations involving impartial decision-making and proper verification procedures. He received corrective disciplinary action, mandatory retraining, and a period of increased supervisory review. The decision was firm, transparent, and consistent with department policy. Daniel accepted the outcome without argument. He understood that accountability was not punishment alone. It was an opportunity to rebuild trust through better judgment. As officers began leaving the room, Daniel approached Captain Carter. "Captain," he said sincerely, "I cannot change what happened, but I can change the officer I become because of it." Naomi offered a small, respectful nod. Every career includes defining moments. The important question is whether those moments make us more defensive or more responsible. Daniel answered without hesitation. "More responsible." Naomi extended her hand. "Then start there." He shook her hand with genuine gratitude. Nearby, Kyle smiled quietly, recognizing that the conversation had ended very differently from how it had begun days earlier on the sidewalk. Over the following months, complaints involving unnecessary confrontations steadily declined across the division. Community meetings became better attended. Officers spent more time listening before acting. Small changes repeated consistently produced larger changes throughout the department. Many employees later said the turning point had not been a new policy or a new procedure. It had been the example set by a leader who answered unfair assumptions with professionalism instead of anger, who chose accountability over humiliation, and who reminded everyone that real leadership is revealed not by the power to command others, but by the discipline to treat every person with fairness before reaching a conclusion. Long after that ordinary morning had faded into memory, one lesson remained unchanged throughout the division. Respect should never depend on who someone turns out to be, because it should always be present from the very beginning.